Mic check. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes, looks like yes. Can I hear everybody else okay?
Hello?
Yes, I can. Cool. Hi, Aisha.
Hello. Ben and I are here.
Friends, back inside the internet.
I can drop a link to the retro.
Who is going to be our lovely moderator today?
Is it Stephen? I don't know. Stephen, is it going to be you?
I hadn't planned on it, but I can do it if you want.
There's also Tim, but yeah, it's up to you guys.
I can try to moderate in the interest of making sure that I don't talk a bunch.
I could as well. I don't think we're, for the list of stuff next, I don't think there's anything that has my name next to it.
Yes.
Okay. I guess I'd rather defer to you, Tim, then if you have no dog in this fight.
Cool.
I'm interested in talking as little as possible, so people are free to shut me down. I'm really interested as the...
Shh, we're going to move on now.
All right, yeah. As the incoming 114 lead, I really am interested in what action items we can take out of this. I was the only person who actually went through and made GitHub issues and then linked to them in the 112 retro doc. I would appreciate it if we followed my lead there. Not to sound super selfish, but it would be really helpful to understand what we're actually signing to if it makes its way all the way to GitHub and has people assigned to it. Not that that helped me finish everything that I signed up to do, but it certainly helped with some of it.
I will take that as a cue, and as I try to facilitate, moderate, take notes also, I'll put a little notation on each of the things in the notes where it seems like we should be opening a GitHub issue.
Yeah, just drop like AI next to it or something.
Yep. All right, so we are focusing in on the what we will do differently for 114 and beyond segment, I believe. I'd had to drop just a bit before the end of the last one.
I think we had the last bulletin of what we want to do differently. The one that Patrick put around release team meeting timings and stand-ups.
Yeah, so the topic of time zones then, staggering meetings. We're hearing that from the community. We heard it last week at KubeCon, so it's certainly a good thing to do. The challenge is always picking a time.
Yeah, I think staggering the first few are still fine when we are just in the weekly cadence, but then I don't know how staggering will work once we go to like every other day and then daily meetings.
Yeah, I think if every role can at least select a representative to be present for the meetings, that's enough. I think initially that it's important to have as many bodies in the room to kind of sync up. But once the teams break out into their relative roles, I think it's fine to just have one or two. So I mean, the staggering should be fine, but I don't think that we have to do it all the time.
I think from Patrick's point, he was coming from later in the game when we kind of invite SIG owners, leads to come in and weigh in on the items. I think that's when he wanted more redundancy. But yeah, it can always be one-off.
And I feel like the slightly different lens to look at that through is why is attending the meeting so important that we need people there for synchrony? Like, what are the critical portions of the release that still seem to require that aren't yet asynchronous? I guess I would view required attendance at a daily meeting to be a sign of we don't quite have our communication game where it needs to be in tracking ongoing work. So with Patrick, like, I don't see the specific ask from Patrick here But because I understand it would definitely be friendly to have more coverage across multiple time zones, but why specifically? Because I personally would be a fan of fewer meetings overall.
Same. So the request came out for, and I think y'all might have seen it, for a doodle for alternating times for the actual SIG release meetings as well. And I think, again, you're totally right. There's a balance, and that there's also a communication aspect. So if we are not communicating properly, I think we are. I think all of the docs that we collect and the communications that we have around the release process are fairly solid. But definitely shout out if there need to be things that we fix. So.
Yeah, I don't have anything else to add to this point.
Definitely, I think just keeping in mind tracking down when there's a need for conversation on something, and being mindful that sometimes it's people in a different time zone, and being accommodating of that, so it's not just always one set of people demanding other set of people show up at their 2 a.m. or things like that. I mean, that's an obvious courtesy to do professionally, right? I mean, that shouldn't be unreasonable. But again, we should be able to do a better job of asynchronous communication, like Aaron says. All right, then moving on to what will we do differently if there's nothing else there to discuss? Okay, test flakes, major area of discussion last week, I know. Before we dive into the stuff here, are any of these links the notepad from last week's discussion? Okay. So first comment, Josh, around reviewing test jobs, and I don't know, maybe reorganizing test jobs, all of these, do these kind of get covered by the conversations last week, and should we just link to?
I don't think anybody's done that. I think creating an actual PR is still on my plate. So the idea is just to reorganize all the test jobs into a blocking and an informing. We should have the same, almost exactly, there's a couple of things that have to be an exception, almost exactly the same jobs in master as we do in the release branch. And a bunch of things are going to get, a bunch of the tests, so basically some things that are currently in blocking will end up informing. Some things that are currently in all are going to drop out of sight entirely. And if SIG release is the only entity looking at those jobs, they'll stop getting run. Because jobs that basically have a 70% flake rate, unless somebody is actively working on fixing those, they're really not doing anyone any good.
Are we going to have like a process to discuss this with the different SIGs, or is all the discussion going to happen in the PRs?
Yeah. So this will be tested for PRs. If you think we should advertise them somehow, I haven't noticed that any of the individual SIGs seem to have much feedback about what goes in to any of the SIG release dashboards. Maybe they should, but I haven't noticed that they do.
Yeah.
So what was the result of the deflaking session from KubeCon? Did we get anything actionable out of that?
Yeah, but they're all medium-term projects because we have a lot of technical debt there. Like Aaron pointed out that we need a lot better visibility into how flaky the tests actually are, so that people can see if they're improving things. Which requires creating some new UI. Some of the other things, obviously tackling the upgrade downgrade problem is a major task in and of itself. We were looking actually, like for the session that we did, we were delving specifically into some of the pre-submit test flakes. Particularly decided to start with the chronic issue of the test volume. I don't remember the exact issue, but it's one that's been with us for a while. It turned out we really picked the wrong one because we still don't know what's causing it. Nor is there any specific ownership of that particular test. So that particular item anyway on that is a lot simpler, which is taking the status of the tests as they are now, with some, both in terms of how flaky are they and how useful is what they show us, reorganizing them. And I'm sure there will be argument over individual tests when I file the PR.
Okay, I'm going to say words now. So this is something I care deeply and passionately about. However, if I'm being fair to myself and to you, I don't think it's going to be realistic that I can simultaneously coordinate the 1.14 release and also coordinate driving down flakes everywhere. This is an area where I think I will collaborate, but I cannot own stewardship of it. And it's unclear to me whether or not Maria, who I believe is the CI signal lead for 1.14, who was taking all of the wonderful notes during our deflaking session, will have the bandwidth to simultaneously steward the CI signal for 1.14 as well as this deflaking effort, or something else. Where I do want to help is in breaking up or chunking up the work. So kind of to summarize the 3, maybe 4 big buckets that I rambled about during our deflaking session, was like, first, we need to make sure there is a clear and well understood path of escalation. So like, how do we identify who is responsible for fixing a given test or flake, and then how do we actually escalate that appropriately? This is why I started the CI signal playbook. And I feel like the CI signal playbook has gotten very, very wordy and verbose and contains a lot more information than just that specific nugget, because that specific who do we escalate to and how do we escalate is really useful information for the entire community, not just the CI signal person. I feel like the CI signal guide could then kind of link to that and be a lot more about what are your daily responsibilities as far as keeping track of CI signal. So that's the who and how, right? Then the next thing is like, how do we actually know, like, what does red look like? What does failure look like? So that we can actually take it from red to green, right? How do we even know if we've found a flake, and then how do we know if we fixed a flake? So this is where I was rambling about things like, if we identify a job as flaky, we can put the little textual tag flaky in the job name, and then it will get excluded from the common set of jobs that are run as part of the release blocking set of jobs, but it's only ever run alongside other flaky jobs. So it has been removed from the execution conditions that caused it to flake in the first place. So we need to find safe environments to reproduce the flakes, to see the flakes, right? This is just kind of the slightly trickier version of test-driven development. Before you go and fix the issue, make sure that you can reproduce the issue and write the test that goes red so that you can see the test go green once you fixed the issue. So in theory, we have some place to reproduce these flakes, and we can see that they are then not flaking anymore once we fixed them. So that's the, like, how do we actually address the meat and potatoes of the problem? And then it comes to, okay, so now we know who's going to do the work, and we know what the work, like, we'll know when the work is done. How do we go identify all of the work to be done? And so this is where we have the human identification, which is a CI signal person feeling a lot of pain and filing a bunch of issues. We have Velodrome, the dashboard that shows the top flakiest jobs and the 2 tests that flake for those jobs on a weekly basis. We could expand that to now do it for all of the post-submit and periodic jobs, like maybe focusing specifically on the release blocking ones. And then we could also federate known anti-patterns, such as tests that depend on events which are not guaranteed, or tests that use the expect error not to have occurred, timed out waiting for a condition anti-pattern. So that's how we can get huge swaths of work that then in theory we could federate out to other people. I would imagine that the folks from SIG testing will be interested in helping raise this signal and this visibility. But maybe this is all CI signal actually needs to do in order to maintain green signal, is to kind of focus on that federation of work only focuses on the release blocking jobs. But those are my things, and I really think that this is something that I want to see us make substantial progress on, but I probably shouldn't volunteer to be the guy making that substantial progress because I've got enough on my plate.
I would definitely concur with that. Some of those things, though, they do seem outside the purview of SIG release. I think specifically the how to write tests which do or do not depend on events, given that they're so core to the production operating the system, right? There's not an operator out there that doesn't depend on events. So if we can't rely on them in test, I think we've got some challenge. But yeah, I do agree that there's a lot of work to be federated among a group of people. I do think that certainly say like API machinery should be responsible for ensuring that you can test the API machinery of Kubernetes. But right, a discussion to have here, I don't think.
Oh, I forget if you were at the contributor summit during the steering committee Q&A, but I laid out and didn't hear anybody violently disagree with the idea that SIG release gets the final say on whether or not we're going to cut a release and whether or not test flakiness should be part of the criteria for cutting a release, yes or no. It's ultimately everybody's responsibility to make the tests better, and we'll find ways to federate out the work. But I just described 3 big buckets that could maybe be the start of a working group, or maybe could just be we could bring the scope back to just what the release team cares about to make the release team's life easier for the release blocking jobs.
Yeah, a little descoping sounds great. I mean, not that the like being able to depend on events in test is a thing we need to fix as a project, but I think it's a project-wide problem, and not a SIG release problem.
Yeah, I agree. It's a project-wide problem. That's why it is important to scope it appropriately, and why I think it maybe is more than just what CI signal as a single person should be responsible for tracking, but I'm sure they would be greatly interested in it. Yeah. So I would as a follow-up or action item, I would like to see somebody go through the notes that Maria took as part of the deflaking session and try to put together some concrete issues out of that. And we could maybe even put together a project board to track just those issues, to sort of figure out what we want to work on and who's going to work on
it. Do we have any volunteers for that? Anyone?
Did I hear Stephen Augusta say the word volunteer? I can write that down.
Stephen has left the call. So we need to find a volunteer for that. If no one on this call wants to do that, I can help chase someone down. I'm definitely not going to own that.
This is just filing issues from the deflaking session, correct?
Well, so I can help create issues, and for all I know, this is something that Maria cares enough about that she would rather do it. I don't want to speak for her since she's not here, but we could definitely use people to steward all of that forward, would be my guess.
I can
using the royal we in the this is recorded and will be watched by others sense. I don't know that I necessarily need a volunteer right now, but I'm going to get cranky if this is something that's not staffed in next quarter.
I can work with Maria to scrub these, create some issues, and then we look into staffing and probably a project board. Yeah, I can work with her to do that.
Awesome.
I had already unmuted myself, and hopefully I don't regret it, but I want to get into understanding more about the CI signal process. So I'd be happy to help dedicate a few cycles to this. I just need some help and some guidance on sort of where to get started, since I'm sort of still new to that side of the house. I've only been doing the enhancement side for the past 2 releases now.
We found another sucker. Volunteer.
Awesome. Right. I am planning to work on flakiness and some other long-term issues in the 114 cycle, since I'm not on the release team for that quarter. However, for some of this stuff, I actually want to consult with Maria, just because at the beginning of the release cycle, she's going to want some stuff that she can assign to her shadows. And so I want to divide up the work so that we've got what's important for the CI Signal team, have them doing that, and then have those of us who are not part of that team doing other things.
So to bring it all back to stuff that is relevant to this retrospective, I pasted a link to SIG release issue number 347 in chat. I feel like that's the umbrella issue I would like to see us track as the follow-up, because it represents implementing the release blocking criteria that we laid down in 113. So part of that implementation is to go chase down SIGs to own each of the jobs and make sure that they have email addresses that TestGrid can send alerts to if their test fails more than N times in a row. Part of that is actually doing the shuffling of the jobs in the reorganization. And part of that is finding some way to collect and instrument and generate the metrics necessary to consider jobs in or out of release blocking. One of those metrics could be considered flakiness, also things like job duration, so on and so forth. And Josh, you might be a great person to take the lead on some of that, just because I suspect a lot of it could be scraped out of BigQuery. The metrics were written in such a way that a human being could actually read all of the summary lines that come out of TestGrid and parse those as a human being, but I would love to have a computer automatically generate those and check them against known thresholds. So if I wanted to scope everything, I would scope it to that, and then I would focus the deflaking effort on making sure that the release blocking jobs stay release blocking. To kick whatever flake, fix whatever flakes are causing jobs to bump against those thresholds once we've identified those thresholds.
To my original item in the thing, though, there is some low-hanging fruit there first, because we have stuff that's in master release blocking for largely legacy reasons, and that we don't actually consider to be release blocking, and that can come out.
I agree. I just view that as a subset of actually completely implementing the criteria.
Yes.
So I think across that set of things, one of the key takeaways here is we need to do some project management on that drive towards execution. We've done a lot of talking and note-taking, and we need to bubble that up into some action next. In the interest of time, I do want to move forward to the next couple sections, unless there's anything else to cover there.
So one note on my side, with regards to the handbooks, the role handbooks, if you're writing a handbook, if you're reading a handbook, if you, I mean, in all opportunities, you should try to link out to more visible locations, more discoverable locations for people. So I think Aaron's point a little earlier, I think it was his first point before we went down this track. Yeah, anything that is a document that would be viewed by someone who is not on the release team should be linked out. That's it.
Okay, so the next section is SIG architecture oversight, sign off for enhancements graduating to beta NGA. So I know a number of the prior releases we've kind of talked around this a bit, trying to do more vetting of what's coming through for enhancements more formally. Aish, you're the first one on the list there, or actually you and Patrick, I guess, together are the combination of the sets of things. Do you want to summarize there?
I'll just quickly talk to the 2 points I added. We already also covered this as part of what could have been better in this release, mainly because we had a couple of instances where there were two things that happened, right? One was for enhancement, unless there are situations when it's not very clear if it's ready for GA or beta, for that matter, in terms of what the enhancement is supposed to offer and test readiness. And this, in fact, came to fore with the SIG Windows support in 113. So as a release lead, I found it like too laborious or even unrealistic to just go very deep into each of the enhancements to even understand what is being planned and what is being worked on. And if at all any, the main traction comes only towards code freeze. and escalation at that time becomes too late in the process, and this rightfully so frustrates the contributors. So the ask is we should have some way where we have like a checklist or formal list of items that the release team, that mainly the SIG owners kind of commit to, and that gets signed off by, say, SIG ARC, or like a bigger body that has the right to like give a stamp, and then the release team can go off of that to make sure that all these are met, so that the enhancement can go to beta or GA. So if this is what KEPs are supposed to be, then probably we should kind of nudge the SIGs to do more of that in 114. I know Aaron was also trying to make this compulsory for all the enhancements in 114 and see how it flies. But if it's not KEPs, then it should be either the design proposal or like the backing enhancement issue, but some place where this is documented and signed off and the release team can go off of it.
So it is KEPs. It should be KEPs. It should always be KEPs. Everyone should be filing a KEP for as much as possible of the work that you're completing, whether it's release or not release related. The current bucket of issues that are in the enhancements repo right now are essentially vaguely KEP tracking issues, or what should be KEP tracking issues, and they define. I mean, they're supposed to have information on the docs, the tests required, and so on and so forth. If that stuff is not complete, it should be completed by the people who are owning the enhancement, as well as have the KEPs actually filled out. There's a larger issue that I had mentioned somewhere, maybe in the architecture birds of a feather, is that we don't have a consistent idea of what graduation criteria is for the entire project. If someone can find that document for me, I almost challenge them to. So because we don't have consistent criteria, we constantly go into this mode of, hey, I'm trying to get my thing GA. Like, is this a political thing that I'm trying to get GA? Is it because it has, the required amount of tests, or what is the required amount of tests or documentation for these, right? We don't have any of that well defined. So that's a cross project concern that needs to be solved first. And then yes, everyone should be filing KEPs.
I refuse to ship 114 until we have that defined.
Well, okay. That's certainly within your prerogative as the release team lead. In lieu of KEPs, however, when Dan and I were working on 1.6, one of the things we went through and looked at each of the proposed enhancement shipping, and for the risky ones, we did make each of those enhancement owners write us a 1 to 2 page document describing their rollout strategy, the rollback strategy, all the things you would need to do to understand whether there was a go or no go on their particular enhancement, and whether it would need to be rolled back and how to perform a rollback in the event you needed to do so. One of the ones was etcd change. Unfortunately, they were all in Google Docs, so they're lost to the sands of time. But certainly there are other options, and you are within your there is prior art for, as the release team lead, demanding additional documentation from individual enhancement owners about their seaworthiness, you may call it.
So to be clear, and I will stop talking soon, I swear. This was also part of my rant at the Contributor Summit in the steering committee Q&A, so it's recorded there for all to see. That, I don't think it is fair to expect the release team / release lead to have sufficient technical depth to dive deeply into a given issue for all N issues in the release to figure out whether or not it is okay. I would like to delegate that to other people who have more technical depth, and I feel like SIG architecture is maybe the more appropriate pool to go to as an oversight sort of role, because there are some KEPs that have authors, reviewers, editors, and approvers all from the same SIG, And that doesn't give me a good feeling that somebody has really looked at this through the appropriate set of lenses. And then further, I think a lot of the things you described about like upgrade and downgrade and stuff, I don't necessarily see those right now in the standard KEP template. Like I would prefer to see some more tactically focused things in the KEP template. And then back to the graduation criteria thing, like I'd like to have some input into what that list should be, but I would much rather have SIG architecture get their act together and write down at least some kind of checklist that we can review.
Sure. I guess I was trying to say specifically, you are empowered as the release team lead to force the enhancement owner and their SIG to write that documentation per enhancements. We did that for 1.6, and it was very useful because both Dan and I faced that exact same problem of having to look at some possibly very scary changes coming down the pipeline and not knowing what to do if things went sideways on those changes being merged in, how to back that out. And so we've made them write 1 to 2 page checklists that you would give, like as if we were operating the ship, merging their enhancement to master and what to do if that were to go wrong. So until there is a scalable project-wide process, which I totally agree that is what KEPs are supposed to be for, and that this is going to be a key part of how KEPs relate to the API review process, you can, for an individual release, which should have 15, 20 enhancements, distribute that task onto the enhancement owners. We had done that before, and I wish I could show you those examples. But, us as CoreOS employees, got a bunch of Googlers in the main to write these 1 to 2 page documents for us so we could understand the enhancement going in. So we could feel confident that we knew what was enough to know whether it was good or bad and what to do if it was bad and who to contact in that case. So I'm definitely willing to help try and recover these from the sands of time, or we can talk with Dan about that experience as well, because we had faced the exact same problem. It was terrifying.
So I don't disagree. What I don't think it should be is an optional process. I think everyone should be held to the same standard. That way there's no question about what needs to happen every release, what needs to happen for every enhancement. So if we decide on a process and we gather that feedback from the sands of time, I think we should make sure that it's formalized and it's across the board.
Sure. I mean, I'm always trying to be pragmatic here. This is volunteer effort always, and try and focus on the things we can get out the door. There is prior art for doing this, and we should apply that prior art until we don't need to do it anymore, because the process takes this concern off of our radar, replacing with some other concern. But it's something we can do in not letting perfect be the enemy of good.
So I think a key short-term action then is to update the template so it's a little more verbose on some of these criteria. And then do we...
Yeah, so there's already an issue open to update the documentation around filing enhancements. So the documentation that's in the K-enhancements repo, and then also the KEP templates. Those are 2 separate issues that I'll link to this document right now. And I'll add notes about the specific criteria. So.
And the second part of it is, how do we assign SIG ARC owners, or how do we decide who are the folks who have to review these and then sign off on that? And somehow,
Yep. Sorry.
and somehow kind of not make them the gating factor, but distribute it among so that pipeline keeps moving as well.
Right. In 1.6, it was the enhancement owner and then the sponsoring SIG. If we didn't get enough feedback from either the enhancement owner or the sponsoring SIG, their lead, or now I guess their TL if they have one, we would just say it's not going to. We will use our authority as SIG release to unship, to ensure that their enhancement does not ship, and that was the stick.
So I mean, I think there have been a few conversations both in SIG release and SIG architecture about what is the stick. Like we don't. Unless it's changed recently, like I don't think we have a means of enforcing rolling back
Yeah,
these
we
changes.
can
See,
we can revert the change. I mean, I guess that was part of the documentation. If there were additional things beyond looking for the PRs and reverting them, but we made them list them, and we made them give us the rollback procedure. So
okay.
we can in fact do it. And
Oh,
yes, you could decide to not ship the entire release, but I do think we have been effective in more narrowly focused threats of destruction.
Yeah, so we should definitely take a look at that doc. So if you can find it, I'll add that as an action item too.
So on the plus side, feature freeze is 2 months before we ship, right? So I mean, we have time to work with the KEPs or the enhancements rather. Sorry, the things that are identified in that first month. We do have time to review them and say, hey, we're missing these aspects and we need to bulk them up. There's no reason for anything to cause a delay because we have a lot of roadmap and visibility on the things that we intend to target. We just need to manage those to a better defined bar. In my opinion, the threshold being ambiguous today.
Yeah, the 113 was like really short. Maybe that's why a lot of these things bubbled up too. The time between feature freeze and code freeze was just 3 weeks. Yeah.
So I guess the final thing in this section that we haven't touched on is review by milestone comment from Patrick. But I think this also relates to the earlier discussion of how do we make sure we have the right visibility on these things as they go by. You know, I thought that was kind of a normal part of the KEP process, but does anybody have a sense of what's missing here?
Yeah, so the background there is that kind of SIG Windows has been driving at this stuff for a while. I think, but yeah, Patrick actually came to see me during, like after one of the talks, and there was an email thread that kind of went around, and they were like, okay, well, you know, let's do this, or what? He's like, what's left that we need to do to get this shipped, right? And we were like, I was like, you should definitely have a KEP for this, right? And it was so late in the game at that point, so there's not an understanding that like you should be filing them all the time.
So was this June or July or more recently? Because this has gone around the block a number of times on the Windows specific stuff.
Right. So this was, I want to say September.
Okay.
Although my internal calendar is off at this point. Yeah, but yeah, the discussion, I can forward you the thread once I find it. But essentially that the criteria that was required was not well defined or explicit, right? So that's not fair to them because they've been driving towards getting something out, not knowing that there were additional things that, you know, if they had done a KEP, you know, long in the past, then it would have been less of a problem. Everything would have been well defined, but I don't think we had that in place.
So I guess within this, I'm struggling with, do we have a one-off issue here or a systemic issue? I feel like I see plenty of signs that the KEP process is reasonably healthy as is. Certainly it was no, people don't think so. Okay.
So I feel like the systemic problem is orthogonal to KEPs. It's that the list of criteria for something to be considered alpha or beta or stable exists in the brains of a few people and is not actually thus far boiled down to a checklist that can be very easily verified. That number of people is bottlenecked such that I like Patrick's way of describing how if there is a capacity problem, it would be good for us to make sure priorities are set up front. So maybe one way we could surface that is that capacity issue is to ensure that a feature A has a KEP and B, that KEP has been reviewed and signed off by somebody from SIG architecture, you know, prior to feature freeze or after some date beyond feature freeze, something like that. But This is where like I'm totally the guy that's willing to be the jerk and throw down whatever hammers need to be thrown down, but my organizational skills are maybe not the greatest, and there are a number of people here who are way better at messaging this sort of stuff and spreading the work around. So this is why I want to talk the least right now, is to hear like how you best think this could be done.
Yeah, so I don't think we need to throw a hammer. I think it's a problem that everyone understands. Just kind of driving to the solution instead. So I'm hearing that we need to improve the documentation around KEPs, how to do the process in general. I'm hearing that we need succinct graduation criteria across the board.
And
also,
what else?
We also need to look at how to tie the KEPs in with automation.
Like what I would
So
boil it down to from a simple messaging perspective is to say KEPs are now mandatory.
Yep.
To say that no, you're not grandfathered in. If you were working on a feature that didn't have a KEP before, you will now have to write a KEP.
So there's also an issue open for that. So I linked the KEP tracking board if you all want to take a look at it. There are some things that are essentially required to do to make KEPs real. Because we have explicitly stated in the KEP documentation that KEPs are in a beta state, and I don't think that's true anymore.
Right. I feel like I have experienced some hesitance from you and Caleb and Jace and other folks when I talk about trying to shove everything through KEPs, and I believe we are long overdue for just imposing some amount of structure on this. So we're going to just try it and see how it goes. So the message would be like, hang on,
Yeah.
let me just finish. So KEPs required for everything. There is no grandfathering, and KEPs will contain at a minimum a test plan and any language around upgrade, downgrade that is reviewed by somebody other than the SIG that authored it.
So as a person working on this effort and with some estimate of how much downstream work is going to be generated by trying to do that, I would strongly suggest not doing that for 1.14, this next release. The tooling, in my best estimation, as a person who has spent, sun up until sundown, not really, but imagine virtual sun up, sundown, working on this problem of how to scale the process to the project's current size. It's not quite ready for that. And the gaps would have to be filled by humans. And as one of the humans who would be forced to fill that gap, I would request that you not voluntold me for that. I totally understand where you're coming from, and there's nothing I wish I could say more than, yes, I agree, let's throw down the hammer.
What gap is there? Because as far as I can tell, we need a document that outlines the future. It needs to talk about how upgrade downgrade is going to work, and it needs to talk about testing, and we need some way of indicating that it's been reviewed. And those things all sound doable, with a markdown document and just our review process.
That's what Yep, and we've currently have that, and we are right now talking about how the current process is not working at our current scale. There are some challenges with notification that are well known that need to be addressed by automation in terms of splitting out the architectural view process decision into some place that is both durable and very easy for incredibly oversubscribed folks like your Tim Hawkins, your Brian Grants, and your Eric Toons to subscribe to, in order to facilitate these reviews that they are needing to be a part of.
That to me doesn't sound like something we should block on as opposed to not having things go through the process.
Just to interject, I think that there needs to be a process, and I think that we're moving towards having a process. I think that having the requirement for architecture to re-review essentially everything that has been submitted as a KEP or as a design proposal at this point is not feasible. So there needs to be some sort of transition mode I don't know what that looks like exactly yet, but I don't think that we can task them to essentially review their, what are there, 100 plus issues in the enhancements repo that are tied to design proposals and whatnot. I don't think that's feasible.
Not all of those are things that are trying to, like, say, go GA during the
Yeah.
release. We need to enforce it for something like that. We don't necessarily need to enforce it for, like, literally everything.
Right, totally agree. And one of the challenges I was explaining is about the signal to noise ratio. The fact someone would, like today, have to do that work to flag the issues that need to be reviewed by SIG architecture. We've had people volunteer to do that in SIG architecture. It's already more or less a full day's worth of work to just do the single pass.
Sounds like the feature tracking lead in the release team.
Yeah,
Well,
on average, we have 40-ish things that end up tracked for a release.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, it's anywhere from, at the start it could be close to 50 something, right? And it usually drops down to about 20 something by the end of the release, right? The problem is up until the point that you're not tracking them, you are tracking them, right? And that's a huge cognitive burden. There's also the issue of, once you start tracking them, the things that slip are essentially things that you couldn't get information on. If anyone's read an enhancement issue, it's like, hey, these are all the things I need from you. Can you make sure that you're following this template? And there are some people who never get that done.
Okay,
Right.
well, we come at it from a different angle then. Where would we propose tracking this sort of thing instead then? Because I do think that if we're going to say, okay, we're GAing this feature, that there needs to be some kind of paper trail for, like, we have an actual plan for this. Case in point, we were talking about the Windows stuff earlier. I just took a look on TestGrid. We still do not have a single working test for that, not even one.
Right. So the paper trail is that steel thread is supposed to be the KEP. It's supposed to include the motivation, the summary, the test, the tests, the graduation criteria, the implementation history, right? The implementation history of that feature or that enhancement, right?
So what is preventing us from saying today that we have to have that together for something that we're going to, like, GA?
Yeah.
Just those things.
I mean, I think it's reasonable. Just with the understanding that, like, we can't or don't have the bandwidth to try to convert everything. Right,
well, that's okay. I think maybe if someone's like, I want to GA something, we can tell them that they need to drive the KEP.
right, but we also are, but yeah, and Aaron's point, we're probably over time on this issue.
Quick. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, sure, James. How you can take the last, take my spot.
Okay. So the GA question doesn't come in all the KEPs. If the KEP is going from beta to GA, only then we need to do the extra effort. The most of the other KEPs are alpha and beta, so I think we have a lesser number of KEPs than the 50 KEPs, right? So that is one thing there. And the other one was the Windows one. I definitely feel that they jumped the gun in the sense that there was no KEP, and
so I don't feel like they. Yeah, so I don't feel like they jumped the gun. I feel like they were unaware of the process and got surprised with the process at the end, right? And because we explicitly say in the documentation that KEPs are a beta process, right? You can't necessarily, and that SIGs don't necessarily need to follow them, right? So it starts with the documentation, right? It starts with the people in the process, and because they weren't aware of that, I can't fault them for that. I actually feel bad about it.
I feel bad about them too, but there is also this, we have the push and the pull, right? And working in the community implies that you don't know beforehand what you're going to end up with or what you will have to do. And we've made people jump through hoops, including the CSI folks, the dynamic volume stuff. And this is not the first time. They are facing it for the first time. So we are feeling bad for them, but this is something that we face on a daily basis. It's just they didn't face it before, that's all. But yeah, in general, we definitely need more from the architecture team. So, and they have to figure out a way to scale up.
Well, this is where it seems like if Aaron actually says we're going to introduce a process this release, then that fixes the we didn't know. Right.
That's fair. So I mean, Aaron, you, myself, Caleb, Jace, Ihor, let's get together and mash on a doc or something and communicate this properly. Let's table the rest of that because I think this could easily bleed into an hour-long conversation. From the perspective of graduation criteria, there is a mention of we should explicitly say what needs to happen for beta and GA. I think it's even more important to say what needs to happen from alpha to beta because graduating something from alpha to beta is arbitrary at this point, right? And as far as I know, my past experience, the CoreOS and the Red Hats, like we won't unless you're mashing on it in your day-to-day work, like as a product strategy, we refuse to introduce features that are not beta, right? So if the gate for beta is getting providers to actually test a feature, that's not a valuable enough gate, right? So we need to fix alpha to beta before we even get to the beta to GA.
I would argue it's more important to fix the beta to GA and come.
No, I agree with they're both P0 almost, and I agree that there are a number of features that get rushed from alpha to beta because they never actually get turned on hosted services until they get to beta. So like we never actually see large user traffic or experimentation with the feature until it hits beta, which is wrong. Alpha is really the time to experiment and play around where you can break things. But yes, that's why I would like to understand what are the rigid criteria to get to beta, and make sure that we are incentivizing people to improve the stability of their stuff rather than just ship new feature after new feature. So if it's harder to get something through, that leads it to better quality work.
Yeah, so I think we're all saying the same stuff, and we have it well documented. So I'm putting Tim's hat on, right? Putting Tim's hat on for a second. We have the graduation criteria that we need to do. We need to facilitate the documentation and the communication around the KEP process and the graduation criteria. And I will help facilitate that. I will work with you and Aaron and Caleb, and we can drive that down. But we've got a bunch more in this retro that I don't think we're going to get to at this point.
Yeah, I think you said we could talk for an hour on this, and I think we practically have. We're 54 minutes in. So let's go ahead and move on and try and tackle a couple more of these real quick. Release notes, guidance, and out-of-tree cloud providers.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Ice.
This is around the out-of-tree, what kind of support or what kind of inclusion that we want for these enhancements as part of our release itself. Should they follow the stages of graduation? Again, should they follow KEPs and how far can they be included in our release notes? Yes or no? We'll still need some guidance there. And if the answer is none of these, then we need to get on the same page and then communicate it when these enhancements come to us.
So just a basic show of hands, all that discussion we just did for the last half hour on KEPs, people thinking that was KK only or more broadly?
So my feeling on this particular issue is that it is up to SIG architecture and the steering committee to be careful about what SIGs are chartered. Beyond that decision, I think what a SIG wants to talk about in the release should be broadly up to them, because SIG architecture and the steering committee have created this special interest group that should be able to talk about, should have access to community resources like the release notes. So if we have, yep.
No, keep going.
So I think that if we have a problem with specific types of release notes being too commercially driven, too commercially attached, I think that's a problem to take to steering committee and to architecture and not try to solve in SIG release.
So then in the interest of time, sorry, Stephen, in the interest of time, do we have consensus that the out-of-tree things are not going to be a focus for 114 versus the next?
I think that they need to be mentioned. I think that we should address it, and if it needs to be if it needs to be a separate meeting, that's fine. I know this came up for SIG AWS in 113. So again, if we enforce, I know enforce is a heavy word for a community project, but we need to define graduation criteria across the board, right? This is not just for KK. This is everything. right? Everything that touches a Kubernetes repo should have some sort of vetting, right? If we can do that, then we can easily just point people back to the docs. This was not put down, right? If you're writing release notes for Kubernetes, I don't think that out of tree stuff should be included in that. I think that it's fine to link back to it. And say like, hey, this new feature is out and it's related to blah, blah, blah. Check out this repo for more information, right? I think it's fine to do that, but including release notes for something that's not included in the repo that you're releasing for, I don't think is the correct procedure.
Aaron.
I have begged and pleaded, I think, with the appropriate parties to make sure we're not trying to land packaging of out-of-tree bits into this release. I hope that there's an ongoing discussion about that for perhaps the next release. I don't want to see release notes for other repos land in KK. The entire reason we want to split this project up into as many repos as possible is to allow those to launch independently of the Kubernetes release lifecycle. So while I can appreciate that, I'm not trying to call them out specifically, but I know like AWS has done a great job of having a bunch of out-of-tree projects to enable things like ALB ingress, I think, and some IAM stuff, right? Cool, great. I don't necessarily think that means they get to ride on the big old hype train that is a Kubernetes release. I think we should empower them to like create their own hype train, or even brag about the fact that you can get this functionality today. You don't have to wait a whole quarter for it. And I would rather encourage that kind of pattern.
I disagree totally. Because they are a SIG. I think if you don't want a commercial announcement, you should not charter a commercially focused SIG.
I think that what we can do is spin up a greater effort around communication for this stuff, not just for communication of a Kubernetes release, but like similar to the LWKD. Here's what you missed. Here's what you missed in the last cycle or something. Here's what happened.
Yeah,
right?
To maybe dial it back a little bit, like I don't want to try and redefine the answer to the question, what are we releasing and why are we releasing it this way? I'd rather that we continue to release just KK and that our release notes and such just talk about the stuff that's in Kubernetes. It wasn't specifically about calling out a commercial thing. I would like to empower the whole community, but then that leads us down a much longer rabbit hole of distributions and what are we packaging and why. And
right.
It's not the time to have that discussion.
Sure. It also makes us immediately inconsistent with things like kubeadm. And so this is why I really want to lean on the SIGs as the body that decides what to talk about. Same with kubectl if kubectl moves out of Kubernetes, which was also the goal. Same with client Go. All the things
they can talk about whatever they want to talk about whenever they want to talk about it. I don't think it has to be bundled or gated inside of the Kubernetes release lifecycle. That's why.
We've got a question or
fundamental disagreement there. That's fine. Thanks,
question
Dan.
comment from Ben.
So I mean, two things on that. One is I don't think we want things like say prow or kind showing up in the Kubernetes release notes, but they are still Kubernetes SIGs projects. I think the idea of some kind of like, here's what the project has been up to as a separate note sounds like a great idea, and we can let SIGs do whatever they want there. There is another point about the whole commercially focused SIGs thing where that's kind of where SIG Cloud Provider exists, and there's totally outside of the scope of this meeting, there's a discussion around should other cloud providers do this. But yeah, I wouldn't want like all of the test infrastructure showing up in the KK notes. That is noise. If it's something that we're actually packaging with the release, it should show up there. If we're not packaging it with the release, it's not part of the release. It shouldn't be in the release notes.
Right, the binary bits. If it's there in our in the things that the team ships, then yeah, that's a good rule of thumb.
Out here.
Yep, we're at the top of the hour. We've got a couple more things. I will propose a time slot, I guess, for the new year to finish things off. Maybe this is topics for the first release team meeting, just to nail down what Aaron is committing to.
No, I think this is this. I mean, we've moved far past the release team. I think these are topics for SIG release meeting. So the SIG release meeting, we should finish this retro and and actually talk about this in a wider group.
Which is first?
Well,
I was
think-
mostly just thinking in interest
I
of
legit
time.
don't know. I haven't scheduled anything, but I will suggest that for the 114 meeting, I would be very interested to see what AIs you would want to boil down to something you would plan to accomplish in the 114 lifecycle that we as the release team could track.
Yes, I think we have shared responsibility there. So we can keep talking about it.
So next SIG release weekly is January 1st, which I think we will cancel. So that makes it...
So I've already sent out email that we're canceling that.
Okay, so that makes it the 15th, which means Aaron's going to want to have guidance ahead of that. So
Okay, so let's try for the week of the 10th, and just we'll work it out on the channel.
okay.
Cool.
All right, thank you, everybody. I'm guessing most folks are taking some time off the next couple of weeks. Rest well.
Yeah.
See you in the new
Happy
year.
holidays, happy vacations, all that good stuff later.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Bye, everyone.
Happy holidays, Happy New Year.